Hi guys, welcome to this session. I am Anish Gupta, the founder of National Law Training Institute and currently in my final year at the National Law School, Bangalore. As you can already see from our screen, this video is going to be very important because in this video, we are going to decode NLSAT 2025. We will be discussing the key takeaways from NLSAT 2025 and this video is especially important for NLSAT 2026 aspirants because we will be discussing the frequently asked questions, the most common question types, what should be our preparation strategy for part A, part B, legal reasoning questions, essay component, and what did the cutoffs in NLSAT 2025 look like. So stay tuned in this session. It will be a very comprehensive, detail-oriented session in which we will be providing you with concrete data, which type of questions were asked, what type of news sources we should refer to, what were some very common question stems that were asked in NLSAT 2025. So stay tuned with us. And I'm sure this video will be very helpful for all NLSAT 2026 aspirants. So moving forward, we will discuss the passage selections first. Why this becomes important? Because this will give you an idea of what type of questions are asked in the NLSAT examination. So as you can see, there were 9 passages, so 75 questions in part A divided into around 9 passages, 8 to 9 questions per passage. So as you can see yourself, the passages were very diverse and contemporary and from relevant sources. What does this tell us? Ki NLSAT will not ask you any random passage or give you any passage that does not hold significance. It will only give you very relevant passages from very contemporary sources or from very heavy important sources which are relevant, which are read by everyone and which are not so uncommon. So as you can see, the passages revolved around this very famous humorous book that was recently published, Kanan Gill's Act of God. Another passage, another satire, humorous passage was in Karachi Biryani. One passage was around public interest litigation in the Supreme Court, the processes around it. One passage was taking a dig at competitive exams and their regulation, how coaching centers are budding in this industry in India and how they should be regulated. One passage was again, see yourself, another passage that was very contemporary, very much in news, that was regarding Ranveer Labadia's arrest. Another passage was around elections as representation of democracy. We had elections recently in India. We have state elections going on. So again, elections as a topic becomes really important. And we saw a passage based on elections in the NLSAT 2025 examination. Let me take you back. This Ranveer Labadia's, the passage surrounding Ranveer Labadia's arrest was even asked in one of the NLTI mocks. So this was a matter of achievement for us, a matter of pride for us, that one of the passages that we gave in one of our mocks came verbatim in the NLSAT 2025 examination. So there was another question about women being persecuted in sports. There was one, again, very much in news, AI and predictive intelligence. Every day there's another article, a news article or an opinion piece coming on artificial intelligence, whether it's a boon or a bane, what are some environmental consequences of artificial intelligence, what are some moral consequences of artificial intelligence. So again, one could foresee that a passage on artificial intelligence will also be in paper. Again, you can see for yourself, all the passages are very relevant, very contemporary, nothing that was out of the box or nothing that one could not foresee. The last passage was a fictional scenario. This was an interesting read where there was a factual scenario that aliens came on Earth and they killed the Prime Minister's financial advisor. So these were the questions, these were the passages that were asked in NLSAT 2025 exams. Most passages were sourced from leading newspapers like The Hindu and The Indian Express. All NLSAT 2026 aspirants who are watching this video, keep this as your ground rule that you will have to read either The Hindu or The Indian Express without fail during your entire preparation journey. If you are starting today, make it a point that you purchase The Hindu or The Indian Express offline subscription, that it gets delivered to your doorstep and then you read. It will not only help you with your reading speed but also with your GK component that is asked in part A, as well as your essay component that is asked in part B. So reading newspaper has benefits that are second to none. So most of the passages were sourced from leading newspapers like The Hindu and the Indian Express. There was some fictional passage. There were also some legal literature that was asked. but the common theme around these 9 passages was that they were around real world issues, trending topics, and legal developments. Again, very contemporary, very relevant, nothing that could not be foreseen, or nothing that was an isolated incident. Everything was in news for a lot of time, and everything was very much contemporary. Now we come to the difficulty level. So there is this question that are asked by all NLSAT aspirants, that what was the difficulty of the previous year exams, and what could be the difficulty of the next edition of this exam, that is NLSAT 2026 for now. So overall, the paper was slightly easier than NLSAT 2026, but important point, slightly lengthy as well, and it demanded attention to detail. So this year, the cutoffs rose significantly, and we will be discussing this in the subsequent part of this video, that there was an increase in the cutoff. This increase could be attributed to 2 factors. Firstly, that the paper was slightly easier than the last year's exam, and secondly, that people were more prepared this year. They had more mocks to give, they had more sample papers to rely on, they had more past year papers to rely on. So people were also better prepared this year to appear for this exam, and also the paper was slightly easier than NLSAT 2024. That is the reason the cutoffs rose significantly this year. Part A was easy. Part A comprises GK, CR, English. If you don't know, go back to our YouTube channel wherein we have discussed the NLSAT syllabus in detail. So all those who have watched that video and now have come to this video to analyze what NLSAT 2025 held for us and what are the key takeaways. So part A was easy with straightforward questions and minimal ambiguity. There were no curveballs that were being thrown around. It was mostly straightforward, mostly on the easier side, with very few questions that actually required deep thinking or eliminating the two closest options. So students who kept up with current affairs especially from February to March, as I said earlier, NLSAT has a special focus on very contemporary news. Contemporary means recent as well as relevant. So the NLSAT has historically asked current affairs that range from January to March or April, whenever the exam is conducted. So even though it is suggested that you start preparing for GK right now, the most important months for your NLSAT 2026 preparation will be from January to the last week wherein your exam is conducted. So people who did keep up with current affairs from February to March and April starting, they had an advantage this year, and they were definitely able to score more than most other candidates. Now part B, case studies and essay, easy to moderate. So again part B was on expected lines, nothing extraordinary or nothing out of the blue there. We had sample papers to rely on this year. We had 25 NLTI mocks. We had 2 to 3 past year papers as well on which we could rely from memory. So part B was easy to moderate. Even though the legal hypotheticals required some conceptual clarity because some topics did require in detail thinking, they did not demand deep technical knowledge or deep legal knowledge at all. No legal concepts were required in part B. We have seen a lot of coaching institutes teach you tort law, criminal law, civil wrong. Nothing of this is required. NLSAT tests you on your analytical ability, on your street smartness, and on your logical reasoning. You are not supposed to know law by hand. NLSAT has always followed this agenda that we are giving you this test so that we can test you on logical reasoning, so that when you come to NLS, you can learn the law. You are not required to learn the law beforehand when you are preparing for NLSAT. So don't fall into these traps of other coaching institutes wherein they are teaching you tort law, constitutional law, criminal law. Nothing of this is required. Only your street smartness, only your logical reasoning, and only your ability to read and comprehend and present arguments is required. No deep technical or legal knowledge is required at all. So key insight from NLTI on this aspect, that the paper favored students with disciplined preparation, regular newspaper reading, and clarity of basic concepts. People who had hazy concepts in their mind, or people who knew in their mind but were not able to implement during the paper, they suffered a bit. But people who were regular in their preparation, people who were constantly reading newspaper and who kept up to date with current affairs, found this paper comparatively easier than NLSAT 2024. Now we will break down each of the sections in detail. So this is the general knowledge section that we are talking about. Even though historically NLSAT has asked around 20 to 23, 24 GK questions in part A out of 75. But this year, the only major surprise that NLS threw was that the number of GK questions rose significantly. This year, we saw around 28 to 30 questions specifically pertaining to GK in part A. So imagine 28 to 30 out of 75 questions were specifically from the GK section. So people who did not keep up with the GK section actually did suffer a bit and were not able to clear the cutoff or make it to NLS this year. So that is why we are focusing more on GK, because next year also we might expect a similar thing, that a lot of questions or a significant number of questions are asked from the GK section in part A. So the level of difficulty of GK section in NLSAT 2025 was easy. The focus was on national and international news, especially, again reiterating, from February to March 2025. This is not to say that previous months are not important. If you are starting your preparation now, definitely July to January becomes important, but not that important. Again, focus should be on February to March, that if any question comes from these 3 months, you are prepared and you know the answer without even giving it a second thought. So even though previous months are important, primary focus that NLS has historically had has been on February to March 2025, or the last 3 months of your NLSAT preparation. Topics included, again, very diverse topics. Sports was one prominent theme in this year's NLSAT. Artificial intelligence, we could see topics on Ghibli art. We could see question on Microsoft chip. In sports, we had Paris Olympics. That was very much expected because last year only Paris Olympics took place. We had a question on Duti Chand's anti-doping news that came out. We had a question on Supreme Court judgments. We had something around collegium system, Ranveer Allahabadi and SC's response to it. And yeah, so this was around Supreme Court. And then we had very common mainstream topics like awards, movies, technology, and current affairs. So again, all those who are preparing for NLSAT 2026, keep in mind that these 3 or 4 topics will repeat again next year, because sports is a common theme or a mainstream theme that comes in every competitive exam. Artificial intelligence, this year it was radical, this year it was highly news, but again, we think AI is here to stay. So you can expect a question on artificial intelligence next year. Also, Supreme Court judgments are anyways very important, so they can feature next year as well. And again, awards, movies, technology, and current affairs are general topics that we find commonly in the GK compendiums that we provide, and as well as newspaper reading. So if you are covering NLTI's GK Gazette, that is the GK compendium we provide, and you are reading newspaper, you are sorted for general knowledge. This year, out of the 28 questions that were asked in NLSAT 2025, 22 questions were directly asked from the GK compendium, GK Gazette, as well as 4 to 5 questions were from our mocks that we had given. So people who religiously prepared from our GK compendium as well as religiously gave NLTI mocks, they scored quite high in the GK section. Now moving on to the next slide. In this slide, we are discussing the sample questions, the sample GK questions that were asked. You might ask me, why am I focusing too much on GK? Because this year the number rose significantly. This year, till last year, around 20 to 22 questions were from GK, but this year we saw around 28 to 30 questions that were from the GK section. So that is why an increased focus on the GK section is being placed today. So in this slide, we are discussing the sample questions. So there was a question on who was the Padma Shri awardee who passed away in 2024 at the age of 90. The answer was Shyam Benegal. Another question that was again very much in news was the spaceship that was struck in Paris. Sunita Williams, an Indian astronaut, was also struck in space in this spaceship. So the answer was Boeing Starliner. We had another question on a recent news that was in newspapers. That was ICC arrested which former president. So Duterte, I think he was the former president of Philippines, if I'm not wrong. So he was arrested recently by the International Criminal Court. Now there was another news, that the sports news, that which new sport in 2024 Olympics was introduced. The answer was breaking. Only Indian to win 2 Olympic medals in one edition, that is Manu Bhakur. So you can see the focus was on sports because Paris Olympics were there. India also performed really good in Champions Trophy World Cup recently. So that is why I think sports becomes really important for next year as well. One important topic that I can think right now, since yesterday only RCB won the IPL, is let's say about Virat Kohli, his test retirement, how many runs did he score. All these things can become important, say, given that NLSAT is placing excessive reliance on the GK section. So NLTI's observation, the section was highly relevant with no surprise elements and rewarded students who followed the news closely. You are not required to skim the news, but you are required to actually learn whatever it is written, and so that you are able to recall properly when you are in the exam. Just if you had just read the Olympics and read the key highlights that took place, you might not have known the important questions that were asked in the exam. So it becomes important to properly read the news, closely and not just skim through it. Now we come to the critical reasoning section. In this, we are discussing the question types that were asked in the critical reasoning section. So a lot of students tell us or ask us that, Bhaiya, what are the questions that are asked in the critical reasoning section? Or we don't understand that how do we prepare or which specific topic or subject we should place reliance on. So in this slide, we are discussing the question types in each of the following in the Part A sections: critical reasoning, English and GK. So as you can see, in critical reasoning sections, we had around 6 to 7 questions based on assumptions. We had around 5 to 6 questions based on conclusions. Inferences 4 to 5, strengthening, weakening arguments 10 to 12, and application-based questions 6 to 7. So you can see the most frequently asked question stems. So these topics are called question stems. That around 7 questions were based on assumptions. That which of the following assumptions did the author make? Or if I do X, which of the how would that affect the assumption made by the author? Another important thing that we should place reliance on is this. One passage was dedicated entirely to strengthening and weakening arguments this year. So, and you can see here also that strengthening and weakening arguments almost formed 1/3 of the entire critical reasoning section. Out of the 30 to 35 questions that were from the CR section, around 10 to 12 were from strengthening and weakening arguments. Strengthening and weakening arguments generally looked at like this. Which of the following arguments would most strengthen the author's argument or author's conclusion? Which of the following arguments, and you have the 4 options, which of the following arguments would most weaken the author's inference or the conclusion or the point made by author? So these are the arguments, or this is the question type that NLS is primarily relying upon or placing excessive focus on, because they want you to think like lawyers. And how do you think like lawyers? By creating arguments and understanding arguments in detail. So that is why to answer strengthening and weakening questions, you first have to understand the argument that the author is making, and then put forth another argument that you think would most weaken or most strengthen the argument made by the author. So that is why this paper saw around 10 to 12 questions from this question stem of strengthening or weakening arguments. Then English, there were around 7 to 8 questions on contextual vocabulary. The word that is operative here is contextual. They will not ask you a random word that tell me the meaning of, let's say, any word. Hyperbole. They will not tell you to give the word meaning of this. But if this word is used in the passage somewhere, then they will ask you that in what context or how is the word used in the passage, and then you have to tell the meaning or the context in which the word is used. So that is how vocabulary is asked. They will not ask you any random word meaning that is not related to the passage, but they will pick up a word and then they will ask you what does this word in the context of the passage mean. Then there were around 8 to 9 comprehension based questions, reading comprehension, that is generally asked in class 10th and 12th also, that you have a passage and then you have questions following that. There were around 2 to 3 questions on paraphrasing, and another important question stem that was in NLSAT was main idea, that what is the main idea behind the author's argument, or what is the main idea of the passage. Now GK, even though we have discussed, just to provide a summary, there were around 10 to 12 direct fact-based questions, around 12 current affairs, and around 4 to 5 static GK. So static GK can come from history, geography, science, polity. Static GK can be from anywhere. Current affairs include news that are or include topics that are recently in news, are being covered by various news agencies, and also seen in the GK compendiums that we release. So this was a summary of this year. These type of questions were asked in NLSAT 2025. All NLSAT 2026 aspirants do take a note of this. If you find these questions anywhere, remember that such a question has also been asked in NLSAT 2025, not just once, not just twice, but 3 years in a row, that these question stems find their way in the NLSAT 2025 paper. Now we come to part B. I know most of you were waiting for this part only. What is part B and what did part B in NLSAT 2025 look like? So as we all know, this year the pattern was changed. Till last year you had 6 questions of 10 marks each and an essay of 15 marks each in part A. But this year the pattern was changed. People complained that they are not able to complete the paper, or that they have to write very short, vague, unproductive answers if they have to write 6 answers. So that is why NLSAT took note of these queries and of these requests and reduced the number of questions to 5. So now there are 5 legal reasoning based questions, and there is 1 essay question of 15 marks. The level was easy to moderate. Nothing extraordinary, nothing too surprising, nothing unexpected. We could foresee such questions being asked. For example, just the last day, 1 day before NLSAT examination, one of our students in the NLTI enrolled students group put this question, that if there is a question on tax on caramel popcorn, how should we flesh the arguments? And we were surprised that next day, the same question was asked in the paper, and everyone was very jolly that it was only last night that they had discussed, or they had thought that this question might come, and the next day it came. So topics covered this year: we had taxation of caramel popcorn, we had a privacy breach by a bank, wherein we had to determine whether the bank will be responsible for protecting information of customers and non-customers. Then there was a question on compensation for employee accident, wherein we had to ascertain whether the circumstances can be considered as a workplace injury. Then we had a question on national emergency and banning of online platforms, wherein you had to discuss cross-border privacy and protest issues. And lastly, we had a question on minors accident, liability for minors accident on a damaged racetrack. Can minors be held liable for actions where they are willingly assuming risk? This is a concept called voluntary non-fit injuria, if I'm not wrong, that if you are willingly taking on risk, then if something happens to you, then you can't be held liable. But again, NLS does not expect you to write this term, voluntary non-fit injuria. They expect you to logically deduce and logically come to a conclusion that if you are taking on risk that you could foresee or that you could expect, then if that harm or injury is done to you, then you can no longer claim liability or compensation for that. So these were the 5 questions on part B that were asked. The key takeaway again here was that your success required not just stating your point, but also addressing counter arguments in a logical and structured manner. So you are not just expected to write that that compensation can be claimed. You have to also rebut the arguments about why compensation cannot be claimed. Only then people who did that were actually scored a lot higher and favorably than people who only presented one side of the argument. Even though you have to take a side that yes, compensation can be given or compensation cannot be given, it is always suggested that you present a rebuttal of the other side in one short paragraph. Taking sides is very important. You cannot discuss the pros and cons of each of the sides. You have to take one side, that whether taxation of caramel popcorn should be at 5% or 18%, whether the bank has breached the privacy or the bank has not breached the privacy. You have to take clear stance. You cannot lie somewhere in between that, okay, bank might have breached the privacy or bank might not have breached the privacy, and these are the 2 considerations or the arguments from both sides. You have to take a stand and then in one short paragraph rebut the other side's argument also. Now we come to the essay section. Again, it was easy to moderate, nothing too complex. Topics were: should women be compensated for domestic work? Should social media be banned for minors? And should the three-language formula be mandated across India? Three-language formula, we all know, was very contested last year. Social media has always been a topic of contention. Even in NLTI mocks, we had given the same topics. So a lot of students who solved the NLTI mock in which this topic was given, they knew what arguments were to be made. They had also received feedback from NLTI mentors based on the essay that they had written. So they knew so they already knew the data set. They already knew which facts to focus on, which arguments to focus on, and then they also had the feedback from our mentors to improve or refine their answers in the final paper. Analysis: all essay topics were again contemporary, relevant, and allowed for logical argumentation. Again, in the essay component, you are not just required to give in facts. You are required to present an argument. If you check the official notification of NLSAT, the essay component is written as analytical ability. So you have to analyze logically and then present an argument as well. It is not sufficient that you just lay down facts or you just discuss both the sides. You have to present an argument. Should three-language formula be mandated? Yes, it should be mandated, or no, it should be mandated. You have to take a clear argument. Essays rewarded clarity, structure, and the ability to connect current affairs with broader social and legal themes. For instance, the three-language formula demanded insights into federalism, education policy, and the cultural diversity. So it is not helpful to read essay topics in silos or in isolation. You have to connect these topics. This might seem very basic question, but you have to connect these to broader metaphysical themes or broader ideas like of federalism, education policy, and cultural diversity. So now we come to the section that most of you must have been eagerly waiting for. In this slide, we will be discussing the NLSAT 2025 cutoffs. So previously, we did come up with a video in which we had discussed potential or probable cutoffs, but those figures were based on student feedback that we got, student responses that we got after the paper concluded. But the slides, the figures you see on our screen now, these are actual genuine data after the results have come out based on the mark sheets and the scorecards we have received. So the cutoffs for NLSAT 2025 after the final official result looked like these. For the outside Karnataka general male, we saw a cutoff of 97. Cutoff of 97 is genuinely very high in this exam. And to give you an idea, last year the cutoff for the same category was around 88. And this year has seen a rise in cutoff of +9. So from last year's cutoff of 88 for the same category, we have seen an increase of 9 marks this year, and the cutoff for outside Karnataka general male has increased to 97. For outside Karnataka general female, since we already know that there is some horizontal reservation for the women category, the cutoff was slightly lenient at 96.75, but still very steep, and not a lot of leniency could be seen in the overall scores for both the categories, that is outside Karnataka general male and outside Karnataka general female. For the Karnataka general male, you will see quite a drop in the cutoff, and for Karnataka general male, the cutoff was around 94. And if you have a score of 94 and you have Karnataka domicile, you will get admission. Because Karnataka, there is a 25% horizontal reservation that NLS offers for Karnataka domicile students. For Karnataka general female, the cutoff was slightly lower at 92. So if you were a woman belonging to Karnataka domicile, you must have got around 92 marks overall, Part A plus Part B, to get offer of admission from the National School Bangalore. For EWS category, we had the cutoff of around 87 marks. For OBC non-creamy layer, the cutoff dropped significantly because there is a lot of vertical reservation for this category. So the score required to get into NLS under this category dropped significantly. So if you are an OBC from the non-creamy layer cohort of the section, you have to score around 77 to get admission offer. if you belong to the scheduled caste category, the cutoff was around 72, and for the scheduled tribe category, the cutoff was around 68. Again, these cutoffs were extremely high from last year. I've already discussed this earlier, that there can be two reasons attributed to this. Firstly, students were a lot prepared this year than last year, and also the paper was slightly easier this year. So owing to these considerations, we saw a +9, again reiterating this, that there was a +9 increase in cutoff this year. Everyone was hoping and wondering that last year the cutoff was around 87, 88. So this year it could go up by around 4 marks or maximum 5 marks. But we saw a drastic increase in the cutoff at 97 marks. And so these are the suggested or ideal Part A, Part B score. You need not necessarily get 54 and 43 in Part B. As long as you are meeting this criteria, 97, you are going to make it to NLS based on these cutoffs. Also, one important thing is Part A is a qualifying sector. So you need to get a minimum score in Part A so that you are in the top 600, and that depends on the category also, so that you are in the top 600 to get your Part B evaluated. So 54 is a suggested figure based on the total overall cutoff. But to get your Part B checked, you need to have at least 51. So this year, the cutoff of Part A or Part A to qualify Part A and get your Part B checked, the cutoff was 51, 55.25 to be very precise. तो अगर आपके 51.25 नहीं आए हैं, आपका Part B चेक नहीं होगा. 51.25 से ज़्यादा है, आपका Part B चेक होगा. और अगर 50, let's say आपके 52 आए हैं, if you have scored 52, the cutoff was 97. So you need to have at least 45 marks. So that 52 plus 97, 52 plus 45 becomes 97. So accordingly, you can check which is your strength. If you think you are not doing good enough in Part B, you need to increase your score in Part A so that you get around 60 in Part A, so that you only have to manage around 37, 38 in Part B. So I think this will give you an idea of what the cutoffs looked like in NLSAT 2025, what are the suggested scores in Part A and Part B, and what were the final scores that made it to NLS this year. Now, final takeaways from this examination. The paper was closely aligned with NLSAT 2023 with no major surprises. Only change was in Part B, where from 6 questions we had transitioned to 5 questions of 12 marks each. The length was slightly lengthy. Time management was the key, as is there in every NLSAT paper. NLSAT is always a race against the time. If you are not able to complete your Part B, consider yourself out of the race to NLS. Completing Part B or completing majority of the Part B is important if you want to make it to NLS. So time management is the key. The skills tested in this paper was current affairs, regular reading, logical reasoning, and clear written expression. Vague answers, not very... NLSAT is not testing you on flowery language. You need not write very flamboyant answers. All you need to present is a logical flow of thinking. As long as you are able to think clearly, present your argument clearly, you will get good marks in Part B. So safe score. 55 marks in Part A should be a safe score for general male, not a domicile of Karnataka state. However, do consider 55 is only to get your Part B checked. If you think you are not that good in Part B, aim for at least 60. So that if you are not that good in Part B, even if you get around 37, 38, you are able to qualify. So if you are a person who is not that good in Part B or who is not able to think and write properly, improve your score in Part A. Target at least 60. However, 55 should be a safe score. 55 in Part A, around 40, 42 in Part B, and you will be able to get in. Key strategy for success: newspaper reading, conceptual clarity, and consistent practice with current affairs and reasoning questions. So you need to focus on newspaper reading. Newspaper reading is indispensable. You watch any of our topper interviews. Every topper will suggest that you read newspaper religiously daily. Do not focus on a lot of things. However, never miss out on the newspaper. Conceptual clarity is important, and consistent practice with current affairs and reasoning questions. So that's it from this session. In this in this session, we discussed or decoded the NLSAT 2025 paper. We discussed how a person should approach the NLSAT 2026 exam, what are the key areas one should focus on in GK, Part A, English, Critical Reasoning, and Part B, what are the relevant and contemporary news sources we should focus on. All the future NLSAT 2026 aspirants who are just starting out their preparation, consider enrolling with NLTI. NLTI is the best in the market for NLSAT right now. We have produced the best results in the last 3 years. Ever since NLTI launched its batch for NLSAT, we have had the best results in the market, and our content, our quality of mentorship, our quality of results are second to none in this field. As you can see yourself, we had 8 out of top 10 ranks in NLSAT 2025. This result is better than last year's rank, result, wherein we had 6 out of top 10 ranks. Imagine in 2024 we had 6 out of top 10 ranks. One could have imagined that we cannot get better than that, but this year we have broken all records and we have had 8 out of top 10 ranks in NLSAT 2025. We have ranked 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10. So imagine the quality of content and classes and mock tests that we are providing, that almost half the batch, that is out of 120 students who get admissions in the LLB cohort, around 55 students are from the National Law Training Institute, NLTI. Every second student in the NLS batch of 3-year batch this year will be from NLTI. This is the quality of content, of mentorship that we are providing, that almost everyone who enrolls with us makes it to NLS. So that's it from the session. Thank you so much. Consider enrolling with us. If you want to know more about us, you can give a call on this number. You can visit our website clat.nlti.com and our team will reach out to you. So thank you so much for this session. I hope you found it useful. Comment below in the comment section if you want us to make a video on something else that is bothering you. We have recently released a video on NLSAT placements. This is a topic that most of you want to know. So go back to our YouTube channel, search for our video on NLSAT placements and get all your doubts cleared. Thank you so much for staying tuned. We'll bring back more such videos in the future. Thank you.